Father in heaven, it is a joy to be alive today on this special day of Pentecost. We do ask for you to pour out your blessings upon us in the form of your Spirit. And I personally ask that you will supply all my needs. Give me sustaining grace today to be able to tell this very unflattering story. A story of your love for someone who never deserved any of it. And I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. I keep telling Reuben that his story and my story are no different. That in my situation and his situation, we are definitely brothers. And today I have to tell you a story that is very unflattering. And at times, unless God gives me grace, it'll be very hard to tell you. So I just ask that you bear with me. I was born into a Seventh-day Adventist family, and it was a time when the church had rejected the 1888 message and replaced it with the works-based salvation. And that suited the character of my father down to the ground. Spare the rod, spoil the child. My elder brother was the firstborn, and he was most clearly Dad's favourite. I was second. By the time the third and fourth boys arrived, Dad had run out of energy. But he had plenty for me. I don't know why. I think I was a child that just knew how to push his buttons. But by the time I was 4, almost turning 5, in October of 1959, I was on the beach in Kirra at the Gold Coast when I got hit in the eye, my left eye, with a stone. Now, we were camping in a tent. We didn't have electricity. Had camp stretchers and kerosene lanterns. And the eye was cut in half. The iris muscle, which is like a washer, was cut and like it was twisted. So instead of the iris muscle and the sclera meeting, the iris muscle went into the eye like that. The lens was knocked out into the bottom of my eye, and the eye fell out of my head. And so can you imagine a 4-year-old carrying his eye back to his mother? I spent a couple of days in Bougainville Hospital, and then I had no memory of the Mater Hospital in Brisbane other than when I woke up. And it wasn't long before Mum died in 1997, I asked her why I had no memory of that. And she told me that was easy to answer. They had booked an ambulance, but it took 10 days for the ambulance to come to transport me from Kirra Beach to Brisbane. So for 10 days, the doctor came every day and gave me a sedative. So for 10 days, I was in a tent, in a bed, and that's why I had no memory of what was happening to me between Bougainville Hospital and the Mater Hospital in Brisbane. I want to tell you this story because my mum used to bash me over the head with it. All my life I kept hearing, you were going to be a minister. You have no right to leave the church. God worked a miracle on you. You must behave. All my life, that was the message I was getting. And the story was that when I had gotten to the Mater Hospital, my left eye was infected. And the doctor was a Wickham Terrace ophthalmic surgeon. Adrian will understand what that means. He was a specialist, high-paid man. And he told Mum and Dad that the first thing he had to do was remove my left eye. And Mum refused to allow that to happen. And she wanted the elders of the church to anoint me. That couldn't happen until Sabbath afternoon. This was Wednesday. So on Wednesday, the surgeon wanted to operate and remove my eye, and Mum refused to give him permission. He kept saying, by the time Saturday comes, the infection will be in the right eye and you'll have a blind son for life. She still refused. On Sabbath afternoon, I was duly anointed, And on Sunday morning, very early, the surgeon came in and I have memory of this. I have memory of the anointing. I have memory of the balloons around my bed. I have memory of the nuns coming along with brown paper packets to give me injections, thinking that I didn't know what was in that packet. I have memory of Dad arriving with ice creams for me, remember the little bucket of ice cream with the wooden spoon? And never ever receiving any of them because they went into the fridge and disappeared. But this day I have the memory of the doctor and the nurses coming, and they took the bandages off my eye, and I culled them every colour of the balloons. No infection, no need for surgery. The surgery that was done previously was sufficient. And so a couple of more things about that. As I started to grow and could identify letters, and I had for the first couple of years 6 monthly checkups in Brisbane. I went to school wearing sunglasses that were that dark green they looked almost black, and I wasn't allowed to take them off. And as I grew and would go to the ophthalmic surgeon, we would get to the point where it was my turn to read the eye chart. And this particular visit, I don't know how old I was, maybe 12, 13. He said something different. He said, read the smallest letters that you can for me. So I read out "Made in England." And he turned to my mother and said, he can't read that. And I was offended. I had just done that. But I couldn't convince the surgeon that I'd just read "Made in England." He said, it's physically not possible, because it was tiny little letters at the very bottom of the chart. So he said to me, well, if you think you can read that, I'm going to take the chart down. Now, these charts were above your head, and there was a mirror. So he took this chart and he walked a few paces out the doorway and made a fair distance, and then he said, tell me what you can read. And they were back to front, but I could read it. And he came in and he sat down and he said to Mum, that's a miracle. He said, this kid cannot read. And then he told me that, he looked me square in the eye and he told me that I had no reason other than a miracle to have the eye still in my head, because he as a scientist could find no earthly explanation as to why the infection that was rife on Wednesday was completely clear on Sunday. And whilst that is a wonderful thing, like the ministration of death, it worked the opposite for me. Hearing my mother tell me this all my life, and I'll skip forward to the time that I've graduated from JMVs, I'm in MVs, I'm studying, and I had no value whatsoever. My value was in doing the exams that I was giving and getting 100%. So I was like a sponge. I used to soak up information and try and regurgitate it. And just lost my train of thought. Yes, I had no value whatsoever. Anyway, I might have to come back to that point. I knew the doctrines that we taught, and I'd heard from the pulpit many times about the standard of perfection that God requires is that which it always has been, perfection. And I felt that there was nobody in the church that worked harder at being perfect than me. By the time I got to about 17, I'd started to plot my own suicide. I had two choices: leave the church and just walk away and say there is no God, or strive and continue to go. And the state of depression that I was in was such that I was seriously plotting my own suicide. I'll take you back a little bit to the time that I went to I'll take you back to primary school again too, because I've just remembered this. But when I went to school, the sports that was played in our school, in primary school, were cricket and soccer. There was no rugby league or Aussie rules. And my dad was a very good soccer player and had trophy cabinets full of his achievements. And I think I must have had the DNA from that, because I was a good soccer player, but I wasn't allowed to join a club because I wouldn't play on Sabbath. So the only time I got to play soccer was during the week. And I wouldn't swear as the other kids would swear. And when things went wrong and somebody got in my face, instead of telling them to go to hell, I told them to go to blazes. Because hell was a swear word that you weren't allowed to use. Well, that was how it was in my family. But I quickly got the nickname Blazers United. So I was never Craig or anybody else, it was Blazers United. And I had a neighbour who had a child the same age as me, and I think he really liked me. But at school, he did everything to prove to everybody else that he hated me. And I can remember one day I got hit in the back of the head and I fell to the ground and realised that Brian had picked up the lid off a rubbish bin and frisbeed it at me and hit me in the back of the head. And then there was, laughter and all sorts of stuff. But by the time I got to high school, the bullying had developed to a ridiculous level, to the point where if I stood still, somebody punched me. And so at lunchtimes I used to run. And I could outrun people hurdling fences that were running on the road. Fear does an enormous thing. And so for 3 years, I kept getting beat up. And if I literally stood still, I got beaten. I mean, I got beaten so bad. And I used to get beaten at home too. And the sad thing was, my younger brothers, I used to beat them. And if you're watching, I'm sorry. There came a day, just before my junior examination. My mum and dad were on holidays, and I was staying with an Adventist family that was 10 miles away from our school, and I used to ride my push bike. And there was a particular young man who ran a group, a bullying group. His name was Wayne Solomon. If you're listening, Wayne, I forgive you. Can't say that out loud, can I? Anyway, Wayne used to take particular enjoyment out of knocking me around. And I rode past him on my push bike and he was talking to two girls. And I thought to myself, he's not going to be interested in me when he's got two girls to talk to. And then something made me look back under my armpit. And there he was on his brand new racing bike chasing after me. Now, I don't know if any of you guys have ever had a bike that we called a fixed wheel bike. There was a bike that when the pedals went round to brake, you had to try and pedal backwards, but the pedals kept going forwards. Has anybody ridden one of those bikes? Fixed gear. And no handbrakes. Okay, just this. Single gear. And in Ipswich at the Five Ways, there was a road called Glebe Road, and it was very steep. I could never ever ride my bike up that street, so I used to hop off halfway up and push it up. I saw Wayne following me, and I stood up on the pedals, and I tell you, I pedalled like nothing on earth. I flew up over Glebe Road. I got so far in front of him that I turned right at the Five Ways, went down past the girls' grammar school, and I knew there was a road to the right that had some S's in it. If I could just get into that street and get round the corner, he won't know where I am, which worked perfectly. And I'm just about spent. I've put so much energy into trying to get away. And then I came back up Ipswich Road back to the Five Ways just at the same time that Wayne came up the other road, and we met. And I turned and went back down the hill and pulled into an Adventist family. I knew where they lived, and they weren't home. And I locked myself in the toilet on the veranda, and I figured that if I was in there, I'd be safe. And Wayne stood outside and just kept taunting me, telling me that the longer I made him wait, the bigger the hiding he was going to deliver. And Wayne was a fellow that had short arms, fast fists, and he hit hard. You didn't even see the fist move before you felt it. And I didn't want to be hit by him, so I stayed in there for a couple of hours, but still no one came. And it was getting dark, and I knew that the family that looked after me would be worried because I should have been home already. And so I thought, oh, well, let's just get out and get this beating over and done with. And I danced around, ran backwards, ducked and weaved and jumped, and I was like a rabbit on a hot tin roof. I wasn't standing still. And then I heard this metallic twang. And I realised that Wayne had punched the rotary clothesline, a big solid piece of steel. And while he was holding his hand like all cowards do, I went smack, smack, smack. Jumped on my bike and took off. And I knew the next day, man, was I going to get it. And I arrived at school late, purposely, and I fell in line in my class on parade, and the gentleman, or the young man that was beside me, said, "Did you hit Solomon?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Boy, you going to get it." And I said, "Yeah, I know." And he said, "He's been looking for you all morning." I went, "Oh." And he was taller than me. I was only a little fella. And then Mark said to me, "He's coming now." And I went, "Oh, no. I'm going to get beat up on parade in front of the entire teaching faculty, in front of the entire school, over 2,000 students." And I had my head down, I was looking at my boots, and I saw his boots arrive, and I saw him put out his hand. I shook his hand, and he turned. Before he walked away, he said, "If anybody bothers you, you tell me, I'll sort them out." Then I looked at his face. He had 2 depressed fractures of the cheekbones and a black eye that spread from one side to the other. I was so fearful, didn't realise how hard I hit. And he was really hurt. And that's the only time from that age that I've ever really hit somebody. I mean, really punched somebody. I saw the damage that I caused, and it was just frightening what I'd done to him. But what was more frightening was all of a sudden I now had some respect. People left me alone. I no longer had to run, and I couldn't compute, why did I have to hit somebody to get some respect? I had no value. I believed that nobody could possibly like me. And so that was when I was 14, turning 15. By the time I was 17, I was plotting my own suicide. I had bought myself a motorbike. I'd got my licence. I'd actually tricked the police and got my licence on my birthday. You're supposed to have a learner's permit for 3 months, but I went and got the learner's permit on the day I'd turned 17, but I'd booked my licence 3 months earlier and told the policeman that I was just going up to get my learner's permit, and I'd ring the learner's permit number through to him, which he said that'll be fine. And then when I arrived for my licence, he said, "Have you got a learner's permit?" I said, "Yeah." "Oh, I forgot to ring the number through to you." 3 months earlier, and I'd got the learner's permit at Bougainville police station, went to the Ipswich police station and got my licence. So I thought I was pretty clever that I could beat the system. And I had a motorbike, and Bob Possingham was running a tour for young people down through Canberra. It was called Pastor Bob Possingham. It was the conference was called It's About Time. And it was about time for the coming of the Lord was the theme. So we had a 10-day conference in Canberra, then we went to Melbourne by bus, and then back to Brisbane. Now, on that trip, I knew a gentleman by the name of Lester Lewis. I knew who he was because when I was 14, he stole my girlfriend off me. And I didn't have that for very long anyway, so it didn't really matter. And he came up to talk to me on the bus. And so we had a conversation. We spent time together, and when we got back to Brisbane, Mum was waiting for us at the bus. So I grabbed my bag and I started heading for home, heading for the car. And Lester came running after me and said, no, you can't leave without giving me your phone number. I said, what do you want my phone number for? So I can ring you, you idiot. Why do you want to ring me? And he looked at me strange. And it was only about probably 6 or 7 years ago that I said to Lester, and he's been my best friend all my life. I couldn't believe that he wanted to be a friend to me. I couldn't believe that he could see something in me that was desirable of a friendship. And only a few years ago, Adrian, after I'd been studying with him for years, I confessed to him that when I was at my lowest point and was seriously considering suicide and had needed somebody, God had sent me Lester. Do you remember the day that Lester got baptised? Did he ever tell you what he said to me? When I needed to hear about God, God sent me you. Anyhow, our house was a very violent house. Everything was settled with fists. And I'd had enough. I was 19 and I decided I wanted to get out of this environment. So I applied for a position in Townsville. I was working in the health department at Walston Park Hospital in Brisbane, which was a psychiatric hospital. And I'd done all the clerical duties from pay clerk through to stores, through to admissions and discharges. And because I had no value, every time I took a job on, I had to do it the best of everybody. So it wasn't long before, including men that were older than me, I kept getting all the acting hire duties because they knew, the manager knew if he sent me somewhere, I'd fix up the mess and then I'd come back and he'd send me somewhere else. And I applied for a promotion. I went to Townsville and there I met my wife. And after about 3 months, Lester said, I can't live without you, I'm coming to Townsville. And then another fellow that I had known when I was 17 by the name of Colin Nicolson, I met the first day that I was in Townsville. And I had met him before, but I didn't know much about the man. I won't tell you the full story, but suffice to say that Pastor Bob Possingham had another camp up at Maranatha on the South Maritchi River. And I was helping Pastor Possingham clean up and get ready to leave when all the other youth were having not a pillow fight, but a horsehair mattress fight. I don't know if you've ever been to Maranatha, Adrian? Do you remember the horsehair mattresses that were there? Okay, they might have been gone by your vintage. But they were big, heavy mattresses. And I walked into the dorm and got hit from the behind and flattened. And as part of my no value, I started learning karate when I was about 15. And I'd progressed fairly well. And I shook myself off, stood up, and I saw another person running at me. So I took 2 steps towards him, did a flying side kick, flattened him. Looked behind me, another guy coming, spinning back kick, got rid of him. And so I'd done that 3 or 4 times, and then as I looked out of the corner of my eye, there was Colin, but I didn't know it was Colin, was running at me. And he'd been watching what I was doing, and he said, right, I'll fix him. So he did the same thing with the mattress and started to go like that, and as I jumped in the air, he went like that. Caught me under the leg, turned me upside down, landed flat on the head. Stood up, people said, are you all right? I said, yeah. Concussion. So anyway, that was Colin, but I didn't know it was Colin. So Colin, Lester and I lived in a house in Townsville together. One day, Colin's telling everybody about this fool that was at Maranatha and how he fixed him. And everyone's laughing. He's embellished the story, and it was very funny, I must admit, it was very funny. But I didn't see the funny side of it. And Colin said to me, didn't you think that was funny? All these. Lester was killing himself laughing, you know. I said, you wouldn't think it was funny if you were the fool. And he goes, ooh. And I said to him, I vowed and declared I was going to repay the favour when I found out who it was that knocked me out. And he goes, ooh. And by the way, we've been friends now since 1976, so that's a fair while. And we have never had a crossword. Lester and I have had one argument, but Colin and I have never had a crossword. And what's so special about me telling you that story is because the 3 of us now are preaching this message. And we've all gone different paths, but we're all preaching this message. And Lester was baptised Passover last year by Adrian, and Adrian gave me the pleasure of helping put him under the water, which was very, very special. Okay, so now I'm in Townsville. Colin comes to me one day and says, you've got to do something with your life, and handed me an application form to go to James Cook University. Remember I said to you if I had a job to do, I had to be the best at it? Colin was doing the part-time program of 6 years for a Bachelor of Commerce. I looked at it and said, that's crazy, I'm not sticking around for 6 years. So I would have completed my full-time degree in 2 years as a part-time student working full-time, except for my professor was so angry at me at making a mockery of his degree that he failed me on a subject to make me repeat it, so it would take me 2.5 years. And then I went to work in public practice. I did the Institute of Chartered Accountants exams, which to me was like 3 years of uni rolled into one. It was pretty tough. And then I started my own practice, and 100 hours a week was nothing for me. My wife used to make appointments in my diary so that the children could see what their father looked like. So I ran my accounting practice for just over 20 years. And things weren't going so well. I started to lose my sight and lose my memory. Somebody can give you advice. People would say to me, slow down, Craig, you kill yourself. When I was 40, my wife threw a surprise birthday party for me, which was the second birthday party I'd ever had. And she gave me a card, and she had a calculation in the card of a railway worker that went to work for the railway at 15 and retired at 55 and how many hours he'd worked. And then she had a calculation of how many hours I'd worked so far up to age 40. And it was about 50% more than the other person. And she said, for goodness sake, Craig, please slow down. I ignored her. I'm 10 foot tall and bulletproof. Nothing's going to happen to me. And then I was working away doing a tax return. And I noticed that no matter how hard I looked at the screen, I couldn't work out what key to push next. I was sitting there going, I know what I'm doing, but why can't I work out which key I'm supposed to push next? And then I thought, right, just grit your teeth, Craig. Try a little harder. That was all I ever knew. From my childhood, try harder was always what was told to me. And my dad always said I was lazy, so I think I was trying to overcompensate for that. And the harder I tried, I realised I couldn't see. And this went on from about 1991, another episode in 95, another episode in 97. In 1998, I went to my GP, who I'd been seeing since 1976, and we were very, very, very close friends. And I went to her with the problem, and Maggie swore at me and told me to find another doctor. And I mean, you can fill in the blanks. And I said, Maggie, that's a bit harsh. And she pulled out my records. I gave you this advice in 91, this advice in 95, this advice in 97. You're now at the point where if you continue on, you'll get to the stage where when you get to the cash register at a supermarket, you won't know what to do next. And I'm just not prepared to watch you kill yourself. So out the door, find yourself another doctor. And I thought, well, I don't want to find another doctor. And she said, well, then you stop work. Really? She said, when they drag you out on your deathbed, I'm sure you're not going to say, I wished I spent more time at work. Stop now. That was September 1998. I had a number of girls working for me in the practice, but one particular girl who was an accountant, who was very loyal, and she kept the practice running just long enough for me to be able to sell it as a going concern, so I had some cash. I bought some land north of Townsville. I bought a backhoe, and I started preparing land for me to live on. And one day I headbutted the backhoe accidentally, because being blind in the left eye, I just didn't see. And as I spun round, like I did up there, Gary, when I spun round and headbutted the girder. And I had a small sebaceous cyst on the cheek, and I burst that cyst, and instantly my eyes swelled up. And so I jumped in the car and went down to the closest medical clinic and went in, had an appointment, and said, can you take this thing off my cheek? And the doctor said to me, and he was a Yugoslav plastic surgeon who wasn't allowed to act as a plastic surgeon in Australia, but he was very, very clever. And he said, look, come back in a fortnight and the swelling will have gone down. I'll be able to take that out, excise that, and leave no scar. I said, I don't care about a scar, and I'm not paying you twice to do the one thing. There's the accountant in me. I'm here for a visit. I've got to pay for this visit. Do the job. Oh, all right then. So he took it out. A week later, I get a phone call saying, you better come back. He said, there's something in this sample that we don't like. So he sent me over to another doctor called Dr. Overwork, and he put me in hospital. And that was what I looked like after I came out of hospital. A fair amount of meat had been taken off my face. And when I was in hospital, he said to me, surgery went well, we've got it all, no problems, off you go. Come back and see me in a week and get the stitches out. Well, the meat that was removed was sent to pathology, and it had sarcoma cancer through every margin, which surprised everybody. In fact, Gary, I've been told that my case has been written up in the American Journal of Pathology as the first known sarcoma patient on the face. So I always do things strangely. So that was a week after that, and there's a hematoma under there, that's why it looks like it's swollen. And I'm about to go get the stitches out, and I've got hot water running on my face because it just felt strange, and then all of a sudden it burst. And I had all this almost black hematoma just running down my body in the shower, and I just screamed out to Cathy. I had no idea what was going on, but I was making a mess. I mean a big mess. So we went to have the stitches out, and I kept saying to him, what was the result of pathology? And he said, well, let me get the stitches out, and then we'll talk about it. And I said, no, well, we're talking, just tell me. He said, let me get the stitches out. And he wouldn't tell me. And so he sat me down and he said, now, I've made an appointment with you to see Dr. Vucek. And that name I knew well. He was a specialist plastic surgeon in Townsville who was renowned for his gifts, his abilities, and you needed a 3 to 6 month waiting list to get to see him. So I said, so you've made an appointment, what, that 3, 6 months down the track? He said, in fact, you've got 10 minutes to get there. I walked out of the surgery, I was driving the car and I was talking to Cathy, and I just remember saying to her, this is not going to be good. You don't get in to see Mark Vucek in 10 minutes unless there's something wrong. So Cathy, I've really done a good job of winding my wife up. She's a nervous wreck. And we went in to see him, and she was sitting on the very edge of the seat. And he had all the CAT scans, the MRIs, the X-rays, and I should say sarcoma is invisible to all that. It's invisible to the naked eye. It's visible once it's stained with paraffin and looked under ultraviolet light. Apart from that, you can't see the cells. And he said to my wife, after looking at all the results, the pathology reports, having all the pictures on his screen and then writing on the pictures, and that took about 15 to 20 minutes, and he turned to Cathy and he said, I'm sorry, this is going to kill him. And that was how Cathy heard that I was in trouble. And she slipped off the seat. And so at that time, in a week's time, I was supposed to be going to Adelaide. My son was a very good cricketer. He'd won a scholarship to go to Brisbane. In Brisbane, he won a scholarship to go to Rod Marsh's Cricket Academy, which in Australia was a big deal, a very big deal. And I was going with him because Rod Marsh was my childhood hero. I was going to get to see my hero. And the doctor said, you're not going anywhere. He said, tomorrow you're going into hospital. And I said, well, can't it wait a week? He said, no. He said, you're going to be dead before Christmas. Whoa, that was a bit much to try and compute. I was 44, sorry. I was 44. And so on the Monday they got me into hospital. They couldn't get me into hospital sooner. There were no operating theatres available. It was the 13th, Monday the 13th of June, 1999. At 7 o'clock in the morning I went into the operating theatre. And that was the Monday. This was taken on the Thursday. By that time, I'd been into theatre 4 times. The problem was, we didn't know it at the time, but the problem was that the veins and tendons that the doctor had taken out of my arm to put on my face, the vein was too small for the capacity of the blood flow. And so hematomas, regular hematomas. And so this is Monday, I've had the operation, and it's about 2 o'clock in the morning when the surgeon comes back to visit me. You've got to understand, I'm sitting in a bed, I'm not laying, I'm sitting. This arm has a towel around it onto a drip stand. This arm has a towel around it onto a drip stand. This one has a blood transfusion. This one, because of all the skin graft on the arm, all the damage to my arm, they were holding it up to get it out of the way so I wouldn't damage it in my sleep or whatever. So I'm sitting up in a bed in a room that's 40 degrees C, so we're talking 100 degrees. And the reason they had I had two big radiator heaters in the room was that because they wanted the capillaries to stay open so that the blood vessels would join and become normal, which was a hard way to live, I can assure you. I lost 12 kilos in that week in that room, by the way. And as soon as he touched my face, he picked up the buzzer. Now, I don't know much about the health, but he hit the buzzer 3 times. And I learnt later, that's in Australia at least, that's an emergency signal. The doctor says, I'm in trouble, I need help now. And I heard noises of things hitting the floor and people running. And within a few seconds, I had 3 nurses in my room. And he's on the left side, so I can't see him. You know, I'm sitting like this and I can feel him touching my face. And he said, I need an operating theatre now. I heard him say something like, if this hematoma gets into the vein, he will die. Either lodged in the lung or lodged in the brain. Either way, he said it was going to kill me. And so I thought, well, this is pretty serious. And the nurse came back and said, there isn't an operating theatre available in Townsville. There's been a major car crash and every theatre is busy. I heard him say to the nurses, we'll operate on him here. And then he asked the nurses, he rattled off some instruments that he wanted and he sent a nurse away to get them. And then he started to operate on my face while I was awake without any anaesthetic. Now, I've had kidney stones, and young lady, I can see you're about to give birth, and I know you know what that feels like, and I'm told that kidney stones is the closest a male will get to know what childbirth is like. I swear to you, the pain in my face was way above that of kidney stone. But I remember something Lester said when he was in hospital once, when he was going through a lot of agony. He said, I don't want to lose my dignity. And that rang a bell with me. And I thought, I don't want to lose my dignity. The only thing I've got left is dignity. And so I promised myself I wasn't going to make a sound. I had my eyes closed. I had tears pouring down my face. I had my teeth gritted. And finally I couldn't take it anymore. And I should have said earlier that I left the church. And I hadn't prayed for 27 years. I hadn't even given my Heavenly Father a thought in 27 years. I was in a desperate need of pain relief. And I said, Father, you said, no, I believed you promised to take my pain, just do it. It wasn't a request, it was a demand, there was no respect in what I said, and I didn't say it out loud, this was in my head. And instantly I had pain relief. And I opened my eyes, can't see him, but I can still feel he's doing things. Looking around the room, my brain starts to work in overdrive. What on earth have I just done? Then the next question was, who on earth did I just invoke? Was this really from God? Or is this Satan toying with me? And I couldn't for the life of me work out what had just happened. Anyhow, cut a long story short because I'm taking up too much time. I had to go back to theatre when one was available to repair the damage that was done. So by Tuesday lunchtime, I'm awake. By 3 o'clock Tuesday afternoon, another hematoma. Only this time, it happened when I had a visitor. And the doctor was called, he came in, he saw it straight away, he rushed off and did something, but he left a nurse sitting beside my bed with a needle, and she was just punching my face with this needle to keep the blood from flowing so that it wouldn't clot inside the vein. And I could feel the needle going in, but no pain. I thought, that's odd. Went to theatre, go into recovery, everything's fixed, it's all pulled apart again, cleaned up, put back together. I come out into the operating into the recovery room, and I get asked the standard question, do you know what your name is, where you are, why you're here, these sort of things. Mr. Jones, I know this is painful, but we've ordered morphine for you. We don't have any here. We've sent a runner for morphine. Only a few more minutes and you'll have pain relief. I said, I don't have any pain. And people looked at me as if I was really weird. And I didn't have any pain. I never had any pain. So in 3 days, I had 4 trips to theatre. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And I was exhausted. And then we got the news Wednesday afternoon that none of that could stay on my face because the tumour went through every margin and was way bigger than anybody thought. And in fact, on Wednesday, my wife was told to prepare for the fact that I may not even come home. So on Wednesday, she went looking for a funeral dress for herself and my daughter. On the Friday morning, Tristan went down to the cricket academy as was expected. And I knew I had to go back to theatre, but I begged the surgeon to give me 24 hours rest because I was just so exhausted from these 4 trips to theatre in 3 days. And that picture was taken lunchtime on the Thursday when I was resting. So I went into theatre in the afternoon of Friday afternoon and I come out early hours of Saturday morning. Wrong button. On the Saturday, what I didn't say before, Gary, was that I was on Effexor 350 milligrams twice a day for the depression, the medical depression that I'd had. But when I'd come into the hospital had a rule, if you come in medicating, then you have to medicate yourself. The hospital doesn't give you any medication. That was their rule. And so for the whole time that I was in hospital, I hadn't taken any Effexor. So Saturday, and I should also say that my wife was a Uniting Church member. And the Uniting Church sent a group of prayer warriors, all ladies, and they walked around the perimeter of the hospital praying on the first day, just for me. And then on Sabbath, on the Saturday, my room was packed with people from the Uniting Church when I started to shake. And the brakes were off on the wheels and I was moving this bed round the room. So I cleared the room very quickly. All my visitors left. And the nurse got the doctor in and the doctor said he's got an infection somewhere. Wasn't true. I was going through the DTs from cutting off the drugs in one hit. And because they thought I had an infection, the doctor said we've got to get him home, get him into his own environment because there's better chance of him survival at home than there is here in the hospital. And so that was taken on the Sunday that I went home, both of those photos. My wife hadn't eaten for a week. She couldn't. And she said to me, on the way home, I've got to stop at the supermarket. I don't have any food in the house. You sit in the car. I said, I don't want to sit in the car. I don't know why I said that. And she said, all right, then come with me. So I'm pushing the trolley around the supermarket looking like that. And I see a little girl skipping, coming towards me. And she looked up, took one look at me, and just screamed her head off. I remember saying to Cathy, I need to go and get some plastic bolts and super glue them to my neck, and then I'd really fit the part. I should tell you too that on the Saturday, I hadn't seen what had happened to me. And it was around lunchtime, and the hospital doors had some stainless steel in the middle for you to put your hand against. And in the reflection of the stainless steel, I could see my wife and my daughter outside my room, and my daughter was sobbing her eyes out. And I heard her say, I just want my handsome dad back. I went, that can't be good. So I pulled myself out of bed, got myself into the ensuite of the room, and when the door closed behind me, it was pitch black. And I hadn't turned the switch on. So if you can imagine, I've still got drips in me, and I've got the drip stand, and I'm fumbling around. Finally, I found the light switch, and I turned it on, and I looked up, and there was the mirror, and I turned it off and opened the door and thought, I don't want to do that again. So I went home. Every night, my wife used to have to put this, like a fishnet stocking, stretchy thing over my, put bandages on over my face, cut holes for my eyes, nose and mouth. And she did that for 3 months, and every day she had to roll the skin graft to get the moisture out from underneath it, and every second day I had to go back to hospital and get a nurse to do that. But they said to me it would take, I'm taking way too long to tell you the story, but they said to me it would take 6 months for the damage to heal. Well, inside 12 weeks it had healed. No infection, no skin graft lifting, an absolute perfect result, which the doctor was amazed at. Where am I up to? I healed. Part of the healing process was I had to go and talk to a psychologist and a psychiatrist. And as a result of talking to those people, I had determined in my mind that the best thing for my family was for me to leave. And I did. By Christmas 2000, I had left my wife. In between, say, October to December, somewhere in that time frame, I had put in a tender for a customs vessel. And I didn't think I'd get it. But I put in this tender for this vessel at a ridiculous price. And I won the tender. And I should also say that I had a particular friend that the whole time that I was going through this, every time I opened my eyes and looked who was sitting in the chair beside me, there was this particular friend sitting in the chair. His name was Jeff. Lovely man, very dear friend. And I put this tender in, and Jeff and I were talking about it because he had gone through a motorbike accident and wasn't working, and he was going through panic attacks and anxiety attacks, and so was I, and getting out on the water. And I should tell you, I had a 27-foot boat at the time, and Jeff used to take that before I got sick. He'd take it and go out to sea to calm himself down. And so we both agreed that we'd buy a boat together, and we ended up with this boat. She's 75 foot long, 44 tonne, twin 1,000 horsepower V12 twin turbo man diesels on Kamiwa S46 jets. She pumps out an Olympic swimming pool of water each jet every minute at full noise. Sleeps 22 people in air-conditioned comfort, 5.2 metres from top to bottom in height, do 30 knots, draw 900 mil. Customs had it so they could chase drug runners up over sandbars, up creeks. We used to do that, just for fun. If you can imagine that thing coming around the bend of a creek and you see these 12-foot and 14-foot tin boats, and they all go, what the heck is that? And we only did it just to scare them. It was just for fun. And then we bought this, we had this other boat built and put on the back of it, and we actually were serious then about the tourist industry. And we would take people game fishing on that little boat, and we had a ball. There was a tourist operator that had been operating for 12 to 15 years, and this is getting too long, but I eventually invested money in that. That was our pontoon at Kelso Reef. That was the Island Pearl. We had dive boats, glass bottom boats and fishing boats from there to take punters to the reef. And so I lived out at the reef all the time. I was the only person out there by myself. When the tourists left, I'd bring the Blue Angel alongside the pontoon. I'd moor it myself, connect the shore power, and when I turned the lights on, all the gannets and all the other birds that were around the place would come in, and I'm talking hundreds. And I would walk amongst them, and they would just move just so that I could walk through. And then every morning I'd start up the water blaster and clean up the mess and wait for the tourists to come. Just a shot of the inside. Through the window you can see the fishing boat. It was a lovely vessel, this one. We started feeding fish, and we'd have up to 200 fish coming up every day for the tourists to see. Had a wonderful time. On that boat of a night time, I was trying to sleep all by myself, and I couldn't sleep. I was thinking of Peter, the Apostle Peter. And I didn't have a Bible on the boat, and I hadn't prayed again, by the way. And I usually tell people at the beginning of this story that, like Jonah, I ran from God, but I didn't buy a ticket to Tarshish, I bought the boat. And I ran out to sea, and I stayed at sea. I mean it. Months I spent at sea without setting foot on land, and I loved it. But I started to think about Peter, and I went back to land, went home to my wife, who was not happy to see me at all because I told her I didn't want any more to do with her. And I searched in my boxes in the library I knew I had a Bible there somewhere. And I took the Bible back to the sea, and every night I'd start reading the Gospels and I'd write down little bits about Peter. I don't know why I was thinking about Peter, that was just what was going through my head. When I'd gone through and summarised the 4, I thought, right, now I can sleep. And I put my head on the pillow and I heard this voice. Judgment, you're on the wrong side, time's running out. I went, whoa, where'd that come from? And I forgot to tell you that while that week that Cathy, when I was in hospital, and she was told that I may not live, that she was walking backwards and forwards in our driveway praying. And Cathy only publicly confessed this at Passover this year. Pretty much she'd never told anybody, because who's going to believe her anyway? But she heard God speak to her, and this is what she heard. He will live, he will preach. And when I spoke, when my first presentation, and Reuben said something to me, he mouthed. I could have smacked you for that. Bad enough my emotions, every time I stand up to preach, that I hear that in the back of my head. I didn't need you to remind me. Oh, did I? So I was a relatively intelligent accountant, and I had a lot of wins with the tax office, and I was arrogant. In fact, I heard my son's testimony one day, and it shocked me because he said, my dad was the most ignorant, arrogant chartered accountant in Townsville. And I said, don't sugarcoat it, son, tell me how you really feel. I had no knowledge he felt that way about me. Lost my train of thought for a sec. Yeah, so I came back to land, and I started to one of the first books I had was God Cares 1 and 2. And when I devoured that, I went and got Cranville Tilney gave me his father's copy of Daniel and Revelation, the 1800-odd, 1890 version, whatever it was. And he said, that'll keep you quiet for a couple of weeks. And I devoured that in a couple of days. He didn't know what he was going to do with me because he was studying with me, and he'd never seen anybody like me before, I think. And so eventually he wanted to baptise me, and he asked me, and the whole time I was doing this, by the way, I wasn't doing this because I wanted to come back to God. I was doing this because I wanted to prove God wrong. I wanted to prove the Adventist church wrong because I wanted to go back to that life I had out on the water. I didn't want to have anything to do with God. This was just an intellectual process I was going through so that I could find that loophole that everybody else has missed, and that I could prove to the world that God didn't exist. Unfortunately, it had the opposite effect. And by the time I'd gotten through all that reading, I was convicted that this was true. By the way, I wasn't converted, I was just convicted. And I was baptised as a convict. And I came into the church with a ball and chain like every other convict that the Adventist church has convicted over the years. And before I was baptised, I was asked the question, do you believe in the Father? Yes. Do you believe in his Son? Do you believe in the Holy Spirit? Yep, bang, under the water I went. I didn't know that in 1980 there'd been a change of God. I didn't know that we'd changed what I was taught as a kid. I was taught that Jesus was the Son of God. End of story. I was taught that the Holy Spirit was the Spirit of Jesus Christ. That made so much sense to me. And then I started sharing that and got myself into a world of trouble. It was 2006, November. My son was married. I went with Jonathan Otto to Mozambique for 12 weeks, and we built orphanages, fed people, preached every night. We had a wonderful time for 12 weeks. I came home and found out that I was no longer the treasurer. I wasn't an elder. In fact, I was stripped of everything, including my name had been removed off the mowing roster, which did cause a bit of a problem because I supplied the ride-on mower. And all of a sudden, things were getting pretty tough. So this is about February of 2007. And somewhere in between, we met. I can't remember the year. We met at Memorial Church, 2006. Anyhow, beginning of 2007, and I hadn't told Adrian the problems that I'd been experiencing. And I get this funny phone call from Adrian. He said, can you do me a favour? Yeah, sure. Now, I don't want you to yell at me. Okay. And I don't want to lose your friendship. Right. I don't want you to scream at me. Right. What do you want of me? That I want you to study out the Father and the Son. I said, I'm already doing that. Because in 2006 at our camp meeting, somebody had come and put anti-Trinitarian material around. And so I was studying that. So he asked me to study it with him, and that started the process of our friendship and our study together 10 years ago. And I can honestly say I've been blessed ever since. That man is the man that I love so much, who every time I opened my eyes was sitting by my bed in hospital. We've known each other over 30 years, and when you own a boat together, there's plenty of room for argument. We haven't had an argument. I want to show you, well, before I do that, I want to just go back. What I'm trying to do by this testimony is to let you know that I know in my heart there is absolutely nothing good about me at all. And why God persevered with me, I cannot tell. I have no idea. And with Adrian's help, I started studying Jones and Wagner. I had read a little bit from about 2005 on, but we really started flying into the 1888 message once we understood the importance of the Father and the Son and what had happened with the Trinity doctrine and so forth. And I read this book called Lessons on Faith by Jones and Wagner. And I got it into my head that faith is expecting that the Word of God has the power to do exactly what it claims it can do, and then trusting God to achieve just that. So I thought, right, the just shall live by faith. So that's how I must live my life. And it was at the time when both my wife and I were convicted that we needed to leave Townsville and we needed to get closer to our children and our grandchildren. And so we put our house up for sale. And it was the time of the GFC. 2008 we tried to sell it. The house was valued at $750. Before we tried to sell it, we had an offer of $560, and we refused that offer because the agent said, this is the first offer, you never accept the first offer, and you're going to get better offers than that. And we didn't get another offer. And come the day that we've got to leave, we've got all our gear packed up, and this was the Thursday, we drove off on the Monday, and we didn't have a tenant for the house, we hadn't sold it, and the worst thing you can do, in Australia anyway, is to walk away and leave a house vacant. And that's what we were doing. So Cathy and I prayed, and we said, Father, you say, seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added unto you. Well, we've got clothes, we've got food, we have nowhere to go. So we expect that when we arrive at our destination, you will have something waiting for us. Now, for the previous 2 years, I've been talking to a real estate agent about land at Mount Vincent, Runkaville, or Mulbring. My son had done the research. Dad, that's the only place to buy. And there was nothing. And so we took off in the caravan, and just as we were about to leave, I get a phone call from my friend who's the real estate agent. He was an accounting client, and said, I've just had a lady come in. She'd been through your house with the open house. She wants to rent it. She's just given me 12 months rent in advance. Do you want to allow her to rent it? And I said to Cathy, that's unheard of. 12 months rent. Has anybody ever heard of someone getting 12 months rent in advance? I said, I think God's telling us to get in the car and go. So we said, yep. And then 12 months later, we sold the house for $420. So we went from $750 down to $420. I've never been real good with maths. Should have taken the $560 offer when it was there. Anyway, I don't know how to start that now, Gary. Click on the picture. No, you don't. No, that's gone. Oh, they need to click on the picture. I don't think there's anybody up there. There is? Okay. Can we turn the volume off, please? Or at least down. We arrived on Thursday morning, having taken 3 days to travel down, and I went and saw the real estate agent that I've been bugging for 2 years, and to cut a long story short, he said, got nothing for it. Oh, that's right, we signed up a place at Bougainville last night. We were sending a photographer out at 11 o'clock. Would you like to go out with her? Oh, yeah, let's go and have a look. And this is what I saw. And I'm driving at the moment to video this, Adrian, because Colin wanted to see my property. So I copied this and Dropboxed it to Colin. And I was on foot at the time. I left my car at the gate and I was actually running. I was so excited with what I was seeing that I took off and ran, and I left my wife behind. I don't know where she ended up. And I came back to the car thinking, what am I doing running around? I've got a four-wheel drive. So I got back in the car and I drove around. And this is our property. And I just wanted you to see, because it's hard for me to describe, the view, the property itself. When God blesses, there's no half measure. And we arrived on the Thursday. This was put up for sale on the Wednesday, and we bought it on the Thursday. God definitely had something waiting for us. And I don't want you to think that there's anything special about me. What I'm telling you this for is because we prayed that prayer and said we expect that you will provide something for us. Where the kangaroos are is where I'm about to build a house, by the way. So if you haven't seen kangaroos before, you'll enjoy this. You know, I told you, Ben, that I've got a dam up on a ridge that feeds our orchard. That's the dam that's coming up now. It's half empty at the moment, more than half empty. We've had dry since July last year. Winter rains, but we had big storms, and I've got photos I'll show you later of the storms either side of our place. And when Cyclone Debbie came down and the low pressure system came up, the two met and we missed out. Didn't get a drop. So while you're looking at that, I just want to tell you one more thing, and that is, when Adrian asked me to come over here, this trip, I didn't really want to come, and he did convince me to come. He wanted me to stay for a lot longer than what I am, but I got this idea in my head that if I asked my Heavenly Father to bump me up from economy to business class, that wouldn't be so much to ask, would it? So I did. And having once asked for it, I was then excited to see how he was going to deliver it. So on the Tuesday that we were leaving, I arrived 3 hours ahead of time by train to the international airport. There weren't too many people around. And I got to almost the head of the line, and the lady came out and started allocating people to go to this check-in counter. And when she looked at me, she said, you need to go and speak to Nicole. Everybody else got told to go to check-in 10 or check-in 6 or check-in 9, or I needed to speak to Nicole. Where's Nicole? I got no idea. So I started walking along the line, staring at name tags. And the last one, which was first class, was Nicole. And I went, oh yes, Father, you're going to give me a first class ticket. This is awesome. I got really excited. And we had a conversation with Nicole, and I said to myself, now Craig, you've got to be super nice if you're going to get this upgrade. And I was being super nice to her. And we had a bit of a laugh together. I can't remember exactly what was said, but she enjoyed the banter backwards and forwards. And then she said, "Here you go, Mr. Jones, you're in row 20K. And I knew there were 9 seats, and I went, "That's odd, I must be sitting out on the wing. I've never heard of row K." And so when I got to board the plane and the young lady's at the door, she told me to go down that aisle over there, and she said, "Your row is in the first row past business class." Oh, I'm in economy. Righto. So as I went through first class, they had a good look at what first class passengers get, and then I wandered through business class and had a first class look at that, a good look at business class. And then I saw the seat that God had given me. It was a window seat, and I tried to do my own seat allocation, and all I could find were aisle seats, and even then I kept getting error 304, page not found, and so I said, "Oh, Father, you'll just have to do the seat allocation yourself, because I can't get this to work." And in frustration, I walked away from it. And this video is about to finish. This is our kitchen garden, where we grow our food that we eat on a daily basis. So this is the first row past business class. Can you see the leg room there? And you know how you sit in a plane and you wait for to see who's going to be sitting beside you? No one came. I had a window seat, extra leg room. When the seatbelt sign was taken off, I had another look in business class. I had more leg room than they did. I just want to tell you, if you ask and believe, God does do things, even today. I wanted you to see that photo because I was over the moon with the seat allocation that Nicole had given me. I was disappointed that I didn't get first class, and I was disappointed I didn't get business class until I saw that, because I had at least twice the room that business class people had. And I had no one sitting beside me for most of the journey until an old man who had bad knees from behind me asked would he mind if he sat beside me. And he was a retired civil engineer, and I said yes. His name was Mark, and we introduced ourselves and had a bit of a chat, and I asked him did he believe in God, and he said no, and I think he was then sorry he came and sat beside me, for the conversation didn't stop. And that's about all I've got to say. Just the fact that I don't understand why God gave me pain relief. Yes, Laurel? I can't hear you, sorry. Oh, you got the time to listen? This is my wife's testimony. At the time that I told her that I was leaving, she had been selected by the John Walker College that trains the Uniting Church ministers, or Alan Walker, I think it is. She had been selected by that college to go with 2 ministers to Bougainville. Bougainville is an island just off the coast of Papua New Guinea, and it has a very large copper mine. And the land was being exploited. The locals were not getting any of the promises that the company had given them. The PNG government was taking all the money, and a civil war ensued that lasted 10 years. To Australia's shame, Australia supplied the helicopters that took the PNG army into Bougainville to start slaughtering unarmed natives, because they went on strike and said, unless you give us what you've promised us, we are not going to work in the mine anymore. And they lined up in, you can't say single file, but they stood there, all the workers, in defiance of the army. And then the army opened fire and started shooting them. You didn't get to hear about that, did you? No. So Australia was looked at pretty poorly. Prior to this, Australia was always seen to be pretty good by these people, by Papua New Guinea and the islands offshore. So Cathy spent 3 weeks, and her story is this, that she told God that she was not going to go to Bougainville, that she had lost her husband, and she didn't see why she should have to go to Bougainville. And while she was complaining, she heard the voice of God again, and it said, I will give you your husband back, but you must go to Bougainville. And so when she heard that, she said, oh, all right. And she went to Bougainville, and I'll tell you one story. They went from village to village to village, and the first thing that this Uniting Church pastor did, who he and I became very close friends, Matthew, was the first thing he did was when he got the elders in the village around, the three of them dropped to their knees and prayed and asked for forgiveness for what the army had done and Australia's part that Australia played in that. That broke every single barrier in every single village. And Cathy learnt a lot about confession and repentance through that. Anyhow, I was living on the boat. At that time we had a contract with Queensland Boat and Fisheries to do their enforcement patrols because their boat had broken down. So we were travelling from Thursday Island out to sea, down the Barrier Reef to Townsville, back up to Thursday Island. Great little job, loved it. So I was in Cairns. Jeffrey was not a good student, and we wanted to do our Master 5 so we could get our skipper's tickets. I wasn't interested in a skipper's ticket. But I was interested in Jeffrey. And I decided that I would do the course with Jeff to make sure that he could understand the mathematics of the course and that he would pass. And so we were doing that course when I heard that the people were coming back from, I don't remember how I heard that, but I heard that the people were coming back from Bougainville. And I knew that that included my wife. And while I was going up and down the coast, God had convinced me that leaving Cathy wasn't, because I'd given her a promise. Sickness or health, for better or for worse. It was a lifelong commitment. And one thing about me, if I give you my word, there's no legal contract that's going to enforce me harder than I'll enforce myself. And the guilt of breaking that promise was with me. And I should say, because if for nothing else, for Reuben's sake, that during that time period I started up a relationship with another woman. So Reuben, when I say you and I are no different, I mean you and I are no different. And I had in my heart decided that I should try a reconciliation with my wife. And so I went and found out what time the flight was arriving, went to Woolworths, bought some flowers, cheap, and sat in the international arrivals area. And every now and then the doors would open and people would come out. And I saw the doors open and I saw Cathy coming and I saw her turn and run because she had seen me. And the doors closed. She ran away. She ran away because she was the first one off the plane. He went back to Matthew and said, "Craig's out there." And Matthew said, "We'll go and talk to him." So the next time the doors opened up, there were the two pastors and Cathy, and they walked over and said hello to me, and then the two men walked away and left Cathy and I to talk. And I asked her, I told her what I'd done and asked for forgiveness and asked would she have me back, and she said without hesitation, yes. Because she had already heard the voice of God saying, "I will give you your husband back." She didn't tell me that. And what I didn't tell you was that about 2 weeks after I was out of hospital, while she was being my nurse and looking after me, she said to me, "I need to tell you something. On the Wednesday that you were in hospital, I heard the voice of God." "Oh, yeah, right. You heard the voice of God." "Yeah, right." And then she said, "No, I'm serious. He said, you will live and you will preach." And I laughed in her face. And then came the time that just after I was baptised, my pastor said to me, "Now that you're baptised, I want you up on the pulpit." And I said, "What am I going to talk about?" He said, "That's your problem." And all of a sudden I remembered the story that I'd written about Peter. So I went and found the notebook, and that was my first sermon. I prepared a sermon on the water 3 years in advance and didn't even know it. So that's it. Let's pray before I forget. Lucky I've got a friend like Adrian. Father in heaven, thank you for the sustaining grace that you have just given me, because without you I would not have been able to relate this story, because it is so personal and so shameful to think that for 27 years I wanted nothing to do with you, and you gave me such miraculous pain relief that when I tell normal people, they don't believe me anyway, so a lot of times I don't tell people about it. But I just want to publicly say thank you. And thank you for using that big sledgehammer to get my attention, because without it I probably wouldn't have listened to you either. Thank you for all the blessings that you give us, especially at this time when you're pouring out your Spirit in greater measure. In Jesus' name.